and reflects the progress we have made in reducing our pension liabilities and credited the state's financial outlook, stable outlook to the state's responsible budgeting practices, discipline of governance, and historically high cash balances. So when I read that, I thought that was a really good reflection of the effort that we made to deal with not only pensions, but actually, more importantly, our healthcare for retirees, which is an example of a benefit that got put in place and didn't get funded. So one of the lessons to be learned is if you want to add an enhancement, fund it from the day one, because it's going to end up very costly to try to do it later on. So, and we did that with the education when we changed the COLA and got rid of that and say, if we're going to do it, then we've got to recognize the cost and deal with it as part of that decision making. So I was happy to see that our credit rating held. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our treasurer, who survived another election. Not everybody did, of course. And have you give us an overview of where we are from your perspective, and I guess I would say for me, one of the things I feel really good about leaving this legislature is the work that we've made and the path that we've put forward to deal with our pension underfunding and our healthcare liability. And I look forward to the day when 2038 comes around, and then we'll have a lot of money to deal with some of the areas that we've been underfunding for years simply because of having to fulfill this obligation. So
may I take a brief moment to thank you explicitly for all of your work to make all of that happen? So,
well, thank you. We spent a whole month of December together. Some of us, it was
the holidays.
I know it was. I remember. But we were able to do a lot, and I think everybody came together, and it was something, well, you know, if we're going to give something, we want a plus. It was like, how in God's name am I going to come up with a plus? But I did. But now the plus is 15 million. And so we'll see how that is honored in the budget when the administration comes forward. So thank you, Mike. And of course, you brought staff.
Yeah.
So turn it over to you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think 2038, when we have all that extra money to spend, I think former Treasurer Beth Pierce will agree with me that the OPEB would be a great place to put that unfunded, or that extra money to pay down that additional unfunded liability. Because you know, the trajectory is good for both the pensions and the OPEB, but you know, the OPEB does have significant underfunding still that we need to continue to pay down, and that's not on track to be paid down until 2048. But that's just an aside.
I don't think I'm going to be worried about it.
But do want to thank you, Madam Chair, and Treasurer Pierce as well for the work in putting together the pension reforms that we have been alluding to, because you know, from the Pension Reform Task Force, and even before that, the work that Treasurer Pierce did to have the conversation move forward in the legislature, and implementing the items that came out of the pension task force, both in the legislature and at the Treasurer's office. We've seen a clear change in the trajectory of the pension systems. Their funding ratios are slowly and steadily going up. The unfunded liabilities are slowly and steadily coming down. The ADEC is more reasonably increasing, and that is actually reaching a point where, from a budgetary standpoint, when you look at it in terms of inflation, it'll actually be less budgetary pressure going forward, even though the actual amount will continue to go up. So a lot to be appreciative of in terms of the way that pension reform came together and the way it's playing out. In that press release you referenced, you know, that was not because we had done bond issuance, but because S&P had changed the way that they were calculating their rating methodologies. And one of the things they did was incorporate more relating to pensions and unfunded liabilities. So you could imagine a scenario where if we had not addressed our pension funds when we did, that we very well could have got a downgrade or outlook downgrade or some other outcome than a reaffirmation of our AA plus with affirmation of our stable outlook as well. So I think it was critical that we acted, collectively when we did, and it's moving in the right direction. So I did want to invite Tim Duggan up, though. We have a presentation like we did last year, and we'll present some slides if the technology will allow for that, and we'll have Tim work through and take any questions that you have at any time, or we can wait till the end, whatever your preference is.
And we do have, well, I have copies, I don't know who got them, of the letters that you sent to the governor's office regarding, the payments, the ADAC, and I guess the OPEB is going to be the big question with the cost of healthcare.
Yeah, no doubt.
That'll be reflected. Okay. So. Right, thanks.
Afternoon.
What? Well, I only have one. I have one for teachers and I have one for state employees. That's why I have two.
Oh. You have them? Or you don't?
Yes.
The letters.
They're on the legislative reports website.
Okay. They are.
Mhm.
I didn't know that before Chris just said it. I want to take credit for my knowledge of the legislative website.
And,
Thank you. Yeah. See.
and the important thing to remember is for the teachers, it's at the normal cost, which is for people or employees now. It's paid by the ed fund, but the underfunded liability is picked up by the general fund, which is a big slug of money, 170 million. People sometimes don't remember that obligation is funded through the general fund.
Yeah.
Okay, we're all set.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Tim Duggan, the Director of the Vermont Retirement Systems in the Office of the State Treasurer, and very pleased to present to you today on the state of our public pension systems. So we have a quick presentation, and what we thought would make sense was to kind of focusing on the period following the great financial crisis within our 30-year amortization period to really talk about the first half of that time period, basically from 2008 till now. Some background on the pension underfunding, why we are where we are, and things we've done along the way. And then to focus a little bit on the pension valuations that we just went through with our boards in late October. And finally, to give a quick nod to the OPEB valuations, the healthcare valuations, which have not been presented to our boards yet. So they remain in draft form. But since we had the opportunity to be in front of you today, we wanted to give you a quick look at where we are based on the drafts. So to kind of start off, we're really going to focus on the 2010s for this first period. Between the great financial crisis and the underfunding that had happened with the systems in the past, by about 2010, we were significantly underfunded, and we had adopted this 30-year amortization period to remove that liability from our books gradually. Early on, I always think about you can't go from 0 to 60 immediately. You can't start paying off a huge amount of that debt each year. You have to ramp into it so that it can be accommodated in year-over-year budgets. And so when we were set that up, there was a planned 5% increase annually in the unfunded liability payment. In essence, it somewhat backloaded the payment because, like I said, you can't do it all right away. But that was what was necessary to start on this path. And happy to say that from that time on, we have consistently paid the ADAC. So as this next slide is sort of a graph of where we were. You saw pre-Great Recession, we were at 94% and 81% respectively, substantial drop off. And then from 09 to 2020, there was a steady decline in the funded ratio, notwithstanding the fact that we were annually paying the amount that the actuaries were telling us we had to pay. So I wanted to look at that a little bit. Why was that? And what are the things we've done to sort of turn that curve around? So one of the reasons was that we had a subtrust set up in the teacher system to pay for health insurance. And so some of those funds in the pension system were going to pay for the health insurance benefit for retirees instead of remaining in the system to earn a return and improve the health of the system. And so what the legislature did in 2015 was to create the Retired Teachers Health Medical Benefits Fund, what we like to call the RTHUM in the office. That's invested by the state treasurer. And rather than having the health insurance benefits paid out of the pension fund, it is a separate trust fund that is that's making those payments. And at the time, you know, we put a note below. I found from one of Treasurer Pierce's old slides that was estimated to save almost $500 million. So a very consequential move in its own right. Second reason for that declining funded ratio, as I alluded to before, was that backloading of payments by virtue of the 5% annual increase in the amount we pay on the unfunded liability. And the legislature's done a couple of things on this front. In 2016, that 5% was reduced to 3%. So you think about the slope like this, kind of leveled out the slope a little bit, made it a little bit more gradual. And then, of course, in 22, with Act 114, the big pension reform legislation, the state put a one-time payment of $200 million split between VSERS and VSTRS, and established an annual payment schedule that last year was an extra $9 million a year. This year is $12 million a year, and with fiscal 26 will be $15 million a year. And that kind of takes that flattened line and flattens it even a little bit more in an effort to save on the interest costs and make the annual payment a little bit easier to stomach from a budgetary perspective. I think those were really important ways that we took a steep curve and flattened it over the past decade. And finally, and this is a really important one, the national environment, pension systems, markets worldwide, were in a low interest rate environment during the 2010s. And so assumed rate of returns that were 8.25% and even inched up to 8.5%, depending on how you measure it in Vermont, they were coming down nationally, and we made the same moves in Vermont, gradually brought the assumed rate of return from 8.25%, I think it went to 7.95%, 7.5%, and then 7%. So I stopped the story here at 7.5% because these first slides, I wanted to really focus on that period up till 2020 and the progress we made. So one of the things that the reductions in the assumed rate of return does is it increases the unfunded liability. So those were some of the reasons. There are others. I ran this by our actuary. He reminded me that in 2017, we adopted new mortality tables that added, substantial amounts of the unfunded liability. So this is by no means exhaustive, but it's meant to convey why that first graph from 2008 to 2020 looks like it does, with slightly declining funded ratio.
Well, I was surprised, though, the actuaries were so off in terms of the mortality on teachers, because if there's a population that has all the characteristics of being long-term beneficiaries, I mean, education, obviously health status, majority are women, to be honest. Those are all characteristics of a longevity. And I remember when we one letter, when we were looking at those assumptions, that was the demographics was a really big hit. And it was like, how could you be so far off when the demographic and the characteristics of that group of beneficiaries is been so well known. And it's one of those questions I've pondered in my garden. Why would they have, seriously, it just seemed rather strange because that would, you haven't got like you do with state employees where you've got everything from, the plow drivers to, the engineers to scientists to, corrections guard, et cetera. So the diversity of the workforce is so much greater with state employees than you tend to think of with our teachers population.
Yes, while I can't speak to the specific assumptions from before my time, what I can say is that this was another area of progress that was made in the pension reform period of the past.
Right, is updating those to reflect,
Rather than a general schedule of 5 years to look at the experience, we're now on a 3-year schedule, and we're trying to get to that. I'm sure if our actuaries are listening to this, they have many responses to that, to the reason for different mortality tables. And it's one I'll definitely plan to talk to them about a little bit more. But right now, I think we're pleased with where the 2023 studies have landed. And we know we're always going to be wrong in our assumptions. The effort is to minimize the extent to which we are wrong, and to hopefully have those errors offset each other to the extent practicable. So then came 2020, and this was still within the period of declining interest rates. And it's when we had a big experience study and took the bite to go from an assumed rate of return from 7.5% to 7.0%. And that was really a significant moment for the pension systems, and I think was largely what led to the next couple of years of pension reform discussions. When the actuaries do their experience studies, they always look back to the most recent valuation and say, if we had had these new assumptions in place for that last valuation, what would it have done to the ADEC and the funded percentage? And so we put it in there for the state and the teacher system. And it really dropped the funded ratio and increased the annual amount that the state comes up with. And from a funding percentage point of view, that was the low point in our recent history. So what happened then is not a surprise to anybody that's in this committee, obviously. You all lived through it in 2021. We had initial governance reforms. That was the year when I think we made that experience study change. It was the year that I believe EPIC was set to become an independent entity. And it created the Pension Benefits Task Force, which in turn, the following biennium led to very significant changes that you mentioned earlier, Madam Chair. There was one-time contributions of funds. Importantly, members have also increased their contributions, and I believe this is the last year of the teacher increases, and there's still a couple of years to go on working in some of the state employee increases. COLAs were changed, and from the state balance sheet perspective, I think what has to stand as the largest change is the pre-funding of our OPEB obligations, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so this is a continuation of that chart from the low point in 2020. We're now on what I think we can confidently say is a sustained trajectory upwards. The first couple of years you're cautiously optimistic, but now we've seen steady growth. I believe in the teacher system, we're up about 10% from our low point. And in our state system, we're up about 5% from our low point. So we're making steady progress in both of these systems, which is really gratifying to see after all that work was put into the pension reform bill. And then we had our next study on the 3-year cycle. And what stood out to me the most during the 2023 experience study, and that was not done this past summer, but the summer before, was that there was really no drama. There were some modest tweaks one way or the other way on different areas. And what we saw was a modest increase in the unfunded liabilities in the state and municipal systems. And the teacher system saw a modest decrease. So kind of what you're hoping for, that there are changes to reflect experience, but not really significant changes that all go in one direction and significantly impact liabilities.
Refresh my memory. We did have to make some adjustments on the municipal.
We have some slides.
Oh, that's coming up.
That's coming.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Happy to jump there now, or
No, it's fine.
so, I just wanted to kind of take a final thought on the background, looking at this 30-year amortization period, 2 Julys ago was the halfway point. It's a time, I guess, I celebrate. I imagine treasurers, Pierce, and Recheck celebrate too. There's not a lot of us out there, but I think it's a really great indicator of progress. We're finished year 16, and it was a really strong year for both the pension funds and the OPEB funds, with returns of 10 and 13% respectively. And then we pulled a quote from Fitch for this deck, but I think any of the ratings agencies have, can attest to the improvements that have been made by Act 114.
Yeah, no doubt.
So with that on background, to set the stage, we wanted to just quickly give you the update on the valuations. This is our where we take our temperature once a year based on the fiscal year ending 6/30/2024. And it takes those assumptions that we had set in our experience study, and it looks at what our actual experience was and whether or not we had gains or losses in different areas. And then it sets the important metrics of our funded percentage for the past year, and then for the upcoming budgeting year, fiscal 26, it sets the annual actuarially determined employer contribution. And I thought I'd cut to the chase just at the start here, so you can see what from a dollar perspective, what we're looking at. We're up from 143 to 151 on the state side, and up from 213 to 227 on the teacher side. And I just wanted to note that also includes the increase from a $12 million plus payment to the $15 million plus payment, which will now stay steady, that $15 million plus payment, until the systems reach 90% funded. Again, helping from a budgeting perspective. The fact that that's not going to keep growing makes it just a little bit easier.
Yes.
Tim, last couple of years, the investment returns, just like you alluded, have been better than expected.
Yes.
Obviously, the market's done better overall. At what point does that mean we just get up to 100% sooner, or does our annual payments get adjusted because we're beating those projections?
A little bit of both potentially, but let me just step back on the returns. So in 22, we had a very difficult year. And so we had a loss, I want to say, in the range of 8%.
Okay.
And so that's not just a loss of 8%, it's a loss off our assumed gain of 7%.
Are we still taking a 30-year average, or what's the average that we're looking? I understand you can't do 1 year and then adjust it, and then next year you got to go the other way.
Right. We smooth those returns over a 5-year.
5 years. Okay.
Yeah. And so after 22, we were carrying this deferred loss, substantial deferred loss, because, the markets really had a tough year that year. And so last year, our return was just over 2 years ago, our return was just over 7%. This year, our return was just over 10%. But practically speaking, that's when you're looking at the market value of assets. When you're looking at your actuarial value of assets, which is what we use to determine our funded ratio, you implement that smoothing. And what we saw this year is just the slightest investment loss. So notwithstanding this 10% return on a market basis, our returns was just slightly under 7% in each of the system, because we're working through that deferred loss. At this point, we don't have a lot left to work through. So all things being equal and we, maybe we beat 7% a little bit, we should be seeing that return.
We still comfortable with the 7%?
Yes, BPIC now sets that 7%, and they review and affirm it every year. They did so this fall. Our actuaries, as part of the valuation process, have to review and affirm that it's reasonable for purposes of the valuation, and they've done that. And in fact, I think our auditors every year will take another look at it. And so it is generally it's viewed as the right place to be based on our asset allocation. No one has a crystal ball. I think, when I ask our actuaries what do you see in this space, everyone's seeing pension systems across the country pause changes in their assumed rate of return. So it's unlike that chart I showed earlier with the steady decline throughout the 2010s, right now folks are pausing. Where it goes after.
But the 7% seems to be a very commonly used assumption. I have a note that Senator Houskett, which I can't see, but she has her hand raised.
Oh,
That was a question.
Can I just make a point on Representative Harrison before?
Oh, yeah, sure. And
Just,
then-
the year leading up to that decision from VPIC to reaffirm at 7%, there was a lot of discussion, and maybe you could just say concern about whether other pension funds, whether the suggestion would be that it would go lower than 7%. So it wasn't that it was thinking about going higher, it was thinking about going lower.
Mm-hmm.
When you're lower, you're being more conservative. It's more budgetary pressure though.
I understand that.
And then the results of the review actually landed at 7% being a reasonable number. And I think to the relief, quite honestly, of a lot of the folks on VPIC, because there was some concern that maybe that wasn't reasonable.
Totally get it. I mean, we went through a period where we were probably too optimistic.
Yeah.
And that's why we weren't, part of the reason why, as you alluded earlier, we weren't gaining anything, we were losing ground.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely appropriate to keep reviewing that every year and make sure we're being realistic and.
I would agree with you because that's one of the techniques to lower the ADEC obligation.
Sure.
Is to gig up the
Right.
returns, even though
Right.
that
They'll
they
cost
probably.
you in the long term.
Yeah, so once again, a
Yeah.
lesson in short-term expediency,
Yeah.
long-term it costs,
As
so.
much as we'd all like an extra $60 million to be able to allocate.
So, Senator Houskett, do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Thank you. I know it's tough when we're doing the hybrid meetings. My question was sort of going back to the idea that there is a point in time in which the pension will be 100% funded. My understanding is that's not really a real target that we ever get to, just given the fluctuations. So my question is, what is that sort of target that is realistic in terms of percent funded? Is it 90%?
That's commonly cited, 90%. But what's the answer?
Right now, from our perspective, we're on a statutory path to 100% full funding. Now, to the senator's question, I think we do look and we will continue to look at whether or not there are ways in which we can revisit the amortization, not to stretch it out or anything like that, but there are different ways that systems are perhaps closing an existing unfunded liability and then putting new unfunded gains or losses on subsequent amortization schedules. Because I think one of the things, Senator Biehoski, that you're getting at is as you come to that 2038 time, any significant swing in the market, you don't have a lot of time to amortize that gain or loss over the, say 3-4 years remaining. So as we approach 2038, we do look at at whether or not recommendations on the amortization period might be in order. But at least as we are approaching management of these systems, we are very much on the path right now to full funding by 2038.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Right. We have two senators that are on remotely, so if we
I can
don't, okay, just let me know if somebody has their hand up or wants to ask a question. Okay.
So we put these charts every year in these decks, and I like them because they provide a nice snapshot of some of the key metrics of our systems, you know, the active, inactive, retirees of the system. So on the left, you see fiscal 23. On the right, you see our most recent fiscal 24. You see what the average pension.
Without me, it would be 8,610.
And then really, I think I'll draw your attention to the bottom line, which is that funded ratio. In this year, our funded ratio ticked up 1% on the state system, which is good, steady progress, consistent with, you know, the direction we want to be headed in. And then on the teacher system, it's a similar story. One thing to note, there is a decrease in the active number of active teachers. So for both these systems, I think they're thought of as mature plans. So that means there's about a 1-to-1 ratio of active to retirees. And so as you know, that's not good or bad. Our actuaries will always tell us it's just something we have to monitor and keep an eye on. But on the teacher side, the funded ratio ticked up almost 2 percentage points.
Which is really good to get above that
Yeah, no doubt.
60% threshold.
Absolutely agree. And then this is the projection going forward. So we took that graph we showed earlier and now extended it out through the 2038 amortization period, where we hope to remain on that steady upward trajectory going forward.
Yes, Rick.
So if you took our unfunded ratios, which has been starting to creep back up where we want it, how does Vermont compare to national averages of state retirement funds?
I don't have that, but I'll get that for you. I don't have that number. I would suspect, and I don't know if Sky, you have that from the ratings agencies, I suspect we're below the median, not in any way in the sort of danger place that you hear about some states in the headlines.
Right.
Yeah,
we can get that, but yeah, you're right, we're definitely on the lower end, but probably the bottom third.
The lower end, we have a lower unfunded liability or a lower percent?
Funded.
Lower percentage.
Okay, all right.
And then this slide, we've been talking about the annual contribution from the state for the state and teacher systems. And you see the big spike in 2022. That was that one-time additional payment made by Act 114. And then what you see is a relatively stable, gradual increase. A little plateau on each of them reflects the additional $15 million payment. And we note that will end in the teacher system a couple of years after the state system is when we're projected to get to the 90% threshold. But it's an encouraging curve that if you kind of plotted the chart from 2020 to 24 and took the slope of that line, you do see the steep increase, which is now made a little bit more flat. And now I just want to briefly speak about the municipal system. The municipal system is not as mature a plan. You have about one active or two actives to every one retiree. That's because the plan was started the most recently in the 1970s, and because towns can continue to join. And when a town joins, they're obviously not they're bringing active employees, not retirees. So this system has historically been the most well-funded during the last decade or so. However, this is a stated rate system. And what that means is rather than paying the number that the actuary tells us we need to pay, the ADEC, the employee contributions are fixed in law and the employer contributions are set by our municipal retirement board. And presently, they're not quite at the level of the ADEC. And so what practice has been under both Treasurer Pierce and Treasurer Pichek is to work with the towns and the employees and come up with a 4-year path to steadily increase those amounts that employees and employers are paying, on the theory that it's in everyone's interest to pay a little bit more to increase the health of the system. And so that most recent 4-year package from fiscal 27 through fiscal 30 was passed by the legislature just this last year. And the effect, it actually is subtle in this graph, but what you saw prior to that most recent package was the funded ratio really just staying in the mid 70s. And with the new package getting up to about 85 by 2038. So it's not solved the issue, but it's something that we've spoken with our stakeholders that it's something we'll continue to monitor. Going forward, there may be more targeted approaches to groups where the underfunding is more substantial, where we need increases. But for now, we have a solid path that I think is a really great achievement from last year to have everyone recognize the importance of adequately funding the system and looking forward to the trajectory. I know Treasurer Pichek is always saying it's the trajectory that you really have to make sure is going in the right direction. I think that's what that package did.
I'm sorry, I'm not very sharp today. Can you remind me what MVA and AVA are?
Market value of assets and actuarial value of assets. So the AVA, that's after that 5-year smoothing.
Thank you.
And I'll just hit a point on this. I mean, I think I want to compliment Tim and the treasurer's team and Beamers and the legislature. I mean, I think as I view us monitoring all 3 of the pension systems, we're on an aggressive full court press. If we see something that's not going in the right direction, we want to act on it quickly. I think that's the lesson we've learned. And this was an example of that.
Came in very late, but.
Yeah, exactly right. And you accommodated, which we really appreciate. Yeah.
Thank you. We move fast. So
Me too.
yeah. As long as the budget's still out there, if you can't do it in the budget, then I don't think it can be done.
And the league too. I mean, the League of Cities and Towns, everyone came together quickly and recognized the value.
There are some school employees that fall into the municipal as well. It's,
A number of school
yeah.
employees, yes.
Is that a significant percentage of employees or relative to?
Of Beamer's membership,
Yeah.
it is substantial. I don't have the number offhand, but I would say, I don't think it's half, but I think it's approaching that.
Really? Okay. I knew there were, I knew it was a percent. I didn't realize it was quite that significant.
Does that mean they get full pension?
No.
No, it's, the teacher system is for folks with a teaching license.
Right.
Aides, janitorial staff.
Bus driver, maybe.
People that work in a school.
But Rutland City, the teachers get both, I believe. They're both in the Rutland City pension.
That's different. There's the Rutland City pension has nothing to do with the systems that we administer. So just wanted to kind of reflecting on the annual valuation, things that we're seeing that I think are really good signs. One is you have to acknowledge a good investment year. And sometimes I think it's really important to just put it in dollars. I mean, $590 million earned in on the pension assets this year is $590 million that the legislature doesn't have to come up with. So it's really a great result from VPIC. They do a really good job, and it's I think that was a great result this year. As I mentioned,
Also, good to hear that because that was one of the things that was changed in the legislation was the creation of VPIC.
Yeah, the commission, yeah.
Yeah. So based on experience to date would indicate that that was a good change to make.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, having the independence of the commission
Right.
and that governance structure.
as I mentioned before, our deferred losses from 2022 are almost all fully realized at this point. I want to say there's something like $25 million range in the state system and maybe only $6 million deferred loss in the teacher system. So that gets us, that removes some of that headwind that we were coming into this past year with. Really importantly, I think ADEX as a percentage of payroll has stabilized. They were at a high point a few years ago, and they actually have come down. And then what we've seen is a pretty flat trajectory of what the ADEC costs as a percentage of payroll. Again, getting to the point that from a budgetary perspective, our hope is that this,
Tanya's hand is raised.
Oh, okay. We have a question from Senator Hobsky.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the ADEC as percentage of payroll coming down means. Does that mean people are being paid less? Does that mean we're paying out less or people are being paid more? What does that actually translate into in meaning?
Sure. So that annual employer contribution that we ask the legislature to appropriate in the state and teacher system each year, we just compare that to the annual payroll for either all teachers or all state employees. So it's not that anyone's getting more or less by that percentage. What it's meant to show is how the amount that the state has to come up with is changing compared to the annual salary growth in the system members.
So there were years where the ADEC was increasing above the annual salary growth, right? And then I think, and that's what you're trying to avoid. I mean, you'd like to see it consistent, or maybe things are going really well, could you be lower?
Right.
And of course, the ADEC is influenced by if you add more employees.
Yeah,
right.
But then the percentage, I mean, obviously then your payroll is increasing and you're
Right.
adding more employees. And we do, limited service they are also subject to retirement contributions as well.
Yeah, so I just looked at some historical data, and I think in 22, we were up to about, in the state system, about 20.7% of payroll. The ADEC was about 20.7% of payroll. Most recently for fiscal 26, it's below 19. In the teacher system, it was about, in 22, it was about 28.5% of payroll. In 26, it's looking to be about 25.5%. So it's ostensibly, you want it to be about 11% of payroll, just going up with your payroll growth.
But it also shows every time you hire an employee, there are additional costs associated, including the retirement or health.
Yeah, right.
Or, what that benefit package looks like over and above.
And important to make sure that you have the appropriate amount that they're paying into the system too, so you're not increasing the unfunded liability at the same time.
Another point I just wanted to make is that all of these plans are cash flow positive at this point, net of investments. The teachers, they both were in 22 with the big additional contribution, obviously. But 2 years ago, the teachers on an ongoing basis hit that mark, and the state just barely hit it this year. And that's really important because in a down year, that means you're not selling assets at a loss. You're able to use the contributions to pay out the current year benefits, and then use what's in the fund to earn a return, that $590 million from this year. And then, as I said before, the municipal plan funded ratio dipped, but the trajectory has improved. And excuse the brief editorializing, but this is working, and we hope that the legislature will stay the course. Do you have anything else on pension?
No, I think just to highlight that bottom part, I mean, I think that's a goal and a focus of us with, Chair Kitchell not being in the Senate anymore and being someone that's really been invested in these issues.
Once I could threaten to come back and walls. It's not just with this, it's so many other areas where you could end up something that seems so easy or short term is not good from a fiscal perspective. And sometimes it's more difficult than others. And because of the underfunding went on for such a long time, particularly for teachers, and then using the retirement pension fund to pay the healthcare benefits only compounded the problem. So the other lesson is don't add a new benefit without really understanding the cost and funding it right from the get-go. Because that's the other thing. Oh, well, let's just put it in for a quarter and therefore, but let's not worry about the annualized cost. That's a common one. I call that the camel's nose in the tent approach to budgeting. So there are a whole lot of techniques that people are using to short-term depress the cost. But the annualized cost or long-term, or where it's a obligation like pensions, it's not going to go away. So
No doubt.
whoever's in the treasurer's office, I'm sure it's going to be vigilant. I remember Treasurer Pierce, the OPEB, remember that $20 million proposal you came? And so I think your office and ultimately the employees of both systems really need to be vigilant as well in terms of speaking up when something of this happens. Because a lot of stuff, oh, well, the appreciation on the assets will more than offset the underfunding. Well, I've said this so many times, watch Mary Poppins. Compounding is key. And when you don't have that, you don't have it in there, it's not compounding. So those are kind of lessons to be learned. And sometimes memories are short in this building.
I'm really stuck on the fact that I can't figure out what Mary Poppins song you're singing in your head when you say that.
Well, a compounding.
I don't remember that word.
You don't remember
Will you
that?
sing it for me?
No, I don't sing. No, I don't sing. I don't sing.
To Madam Chair's point, I think one of our areas of focus will be to educate new legislators on this history and the importance of staying the course. And because there are, as we move further and further away from 2020 and 2021, 2022, there are new legislators, and it's important from our perspective to continue that education.
I'd also,
Thanks.
it just occurred to me that one of the things I neglected to put in the deck is that, none of these solutions were silver bullets. It was a lot of modest, or some bigger than others, but it was a lot of steps that made this improvement. It wasn't just, finding that one silver bullet. And as an example, I forgot to mention that in this past year, the waterfall payments triggered. And so there was extra revenue at the end of the fiscal year. That was another small improvement that was made. And so I felt I should just bring that up. And both the state system received an extra $8.9 million, and the teachers system funded the post-retirement adjustment benefit enhancement fund to the tune of another $8.9 million, which is now going to be invested and continue to grow over the years.
No, that was all part of that package. It actually there were a whole lot of factors that were included, and part of the quid pro quo was some of the concessions on the COLAs and whatever, with the understanding that those plus payments would be made to help accelerate the funding of the pension. So, and using the federal money, that 200 million made a big difference in terms of paying down liability. So Senator Collmore, do you have any questions or comments? I just want to give you an opportunity now that we have you on the screen.
No, Madam
Chair.
I found this very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Tanya, do you have anything more?
I want to say thank you to the treasurer, and really thank you for highlighting the point that this is not going to be a quick fix, and it's not, we can't snap our fingers and make it all perfect, that we really have to stay the course, and it's going to, take time.
Yeah. Okay. So that was really the purpose, is just got an update where we are at this point before the session. And
Do you know a little bit more you want to say?
We do have a brief note on OPEB.
Oh, yes.
You'd like to say
I
quick.
do want, because OPEB, I expect, particularly with the cost of healthcare, is going to be when you sit on a cactus, which thorn is going to dig you the deepest. So I think maybe OPEB might be in that category.
We're on fire tonight with us.
Takes many years of practice to sit upon it. Remember that poem?
No, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. All right.
So really quickly, OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. What we're really talking about is health insurance, retiree health insurance here. In the pre-times, before Act 114, the state paid for those benefits on a pay-as-you-go basis. And I think Well, I'm going to maybe contradict myself because while I said there are no silver bullets, there was one really big improvement from a fiscal standpoint was the pre-funding of the OPEB. That was estimated a couple years ago by JFO to have saved $1.7 billion, reduced our liabilities by that much. So just a really huge step and one that we've now have a couple years under our belt following through on. That plan to pre-fund the full liability goes until 2048 as a treasurer said before. So again, cutting to the chase, last year, the annual contributions for retiree health insurance were 78 million and 70 million for the state and teachers respectively. And upcoming, and again, I do want to emphasize that we have not presented these to our boards yet, so we do consider these numbers draft. But the state ADEC is projected to increase to 94 million and the teachers to $80 million. And we gave you a quick snapshot here, similar to what we had for the pension systems. That just kind of indicates what the liabilities are. And again, I'll direct you to the bottom line, which is an improvement in the funded ratio of the VSERS health plan here by over 1%. And when you go to the next one, to the VSTRS OPEB plan by over 3%. So a really solid improvement. We're at the beginning of our journey, but definitely in a good place with our pre-funding plan. And so just a couple of takeaways as we review these reports. It'll come as no surprise to anyone that health costs are increasing substantially. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the increases in new assumptions for the trend of healthcare costs increasing, and particularly on the state side, additional per capita claims over what was assumed. And I think much of that is just attributable to health insurance costs. They're rising, and that's going to come out in the wash when you're setting the ADEC. But the pre-funding plan is working. As I noted before, gains in the funded status in both plans. And just again, to put this in perspective, between the state and teachers plan, the investment income was $32 million in 24. That's $32 million.
And it's separate. As we did something with the OPEB, did we put it in a separate fund but it's still being
OPEB is in its own trust fund.
right, but it's still being, the investments are still under the purview of BPIC.
Right now, they're under the treasurer's office.
You.
Yeah.
But we're gonna what we're gonna
Yeah,
do.
we've done a study last year to look at that and the cost benefit of keeping it or moving it or having some other system. Right now,
And what was it, did we,
We didn't do it.
yeah, right now, I mean, there's I think at some point as the monies that are in the OPEB trust fund get larger and larger, the question becomes more relevant. But we do have an MOU with BPIC, access to some of their investments.
Okay. I knew we'd had discussion,
Yeah.
I couldn't remember how.
So I think at some point it will make sense to move forward on that. Some of the cost savings weren't quite as apparent as maybe we thought they would be, but as the system, as more and more money is in that OPEB system,
Right.
Both because there's some efficiency and also because a lot of states are moving away from sole fiduciary models. Right now for the OPEB, the treasurer is the sole fiduciary.
Thanks. Is that the more slides or?
Some links, if you like to get into the valuations themselves, and we will certainly post the OPEB valuations after they've gone.
I think Chris will do that for us.
I bet he already has.
Questions or comments?
Madam Chair, maybe you'll indulge, maybe we could call one more witness, which is former Treasurer Beth Pierce. She may want to say a few words on
Oh, certainly.
of thanks.
I don't need to go over the numbers because these guys they're really good. I think Tim has become an actuarial wannabe, which is a good thing. At least I think so. But I just wanted to say thank you, Senator, for all your work. we were talking before this, we've been working on OPEB and the teachers' healthcare in particular since actually 2008. And coming to the legislature with some ideas for pre-funding, actually to get the teachers on a pay-go basis. At one point, we were putting it on the credit card, and you were instrumental in changing that, so I want to say thank you. And then we were working this through, and I'm gonna be honest, I was starting to go to Plan B because we weren't getting anywhere. And so we had Plan A, which was pre-funding, and then we had a Plan B, which was ratcheting it up every year to get to that. And we were starting to say, well, if we can't get A, we'll go for B. You stepped in and said, hey, let's do Plan A. And you really brought that, you and your committee, but you led the charge, Senator, and I am so grateful for what you did there and I know that the teachers are and the state employees are. It really made
a small group that spent a lot of time together in the Ethan Allen room, working out what we can do. And but that it was within that environment. We said we have to we had this agreement, we had to deal with the OPEB and move away from just pay-go. And so we kind of expanded the mission a little bit, but I think it was the time and it was the right thing. And we had some additional money because of all the federal dollars. So it seemed to be the right thing, but it was quite a Christmas present, wasn't it? As I look at the faces that, and so Becca Ballant was pro tem, and she basically said, this is coming down to money, and so you're it. And Joint Fiscal was a big help, and Chris was there, and Stephanie Barrett was there, and then the folks from VSCA and teachers, and so it turned out really well. But so much work has to be sort of done in this kind of environment, in terms of moving the money, doing the analysis, looking at what the options, trying to estimate what the benefit would be in terms of savings, et cetera. So it actually turned out to be a really, really good work group. And
I do believe that Treasurer Pierce is trying to acknowledge you explicitly. Yeah. I just want to make sure that we just make that entirely clear.
Thank you. If I could say one more thing on that, everyone in the room, and people, former legislators, you all participated, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for, because I looked at this as something that I would want to get done before I retired, and you did. But as I said, I was starting to feel like we'll have to go with Plan B. You brought it up, you brought it to fruition, and I am so grateful. You're retiring, retiring as well from the legislature. I think that we're all grateful for what you did, and pensions all the way through and with OPEB. And I know how much the state employees and the teachers appreciate that. And the staff in the treasurer's office. And I know that Mike is going to continue to carry this. He's taken this a step.
I'm going to haunt him.
He's taken this to the
rest of his tenure.
I said that Beth asked me one of the qualifying questions was, you're going to support the defined benefit plan, right? And she had just been given a big axe by the fire union.
Yeah.
So I said, yes, of course.
When they retire, they give them, the retired firefighters a bronze axe. And they made me an honorary member and gave me an axe, which is very dangerous to have me hold an axe. Thank you again. Thank you all for your work. Beth. Thank you very much for your hard work over all these years. Thank you.
Okay. Well, anyone else want to make any comments or questions? Otherwise, we've kind of got a good, I feel like we're in a good place, and people are tired and ready to call it a day.